Hey everyone, CWD Music Reviews here. I'm CWD and this is going to be a music review of the new Autechre album, Elseq. Autechre are a UK electronic duo that have been around for about 2 decades now, and this is their latest full-length project. I first caught on to this duo when they dropped an album called Xi. What they did on that project was an elongated form of what it is they've been doing for quite a while, challenging the listener with ambitious and esoteric music. They've been big pioneers for the genre IDM. And with this new album, Autechre are definitely upping the ante, not just from Xi, but what they've been doing for quite a while now. Not just because they are once again putting a unique mark on the world of electronic music, but also because of the fact that this album is 4 hours in length. Now, Autechre aren't no strangers to really long projects. I mean, Xi was about 2 hours in length. It's just that they never really had an album that's this ambitiously long. But what can be confusing is the fact that Autechre have marketed this as 5 separate albums. That's why the official name for this album is Elseq 1 through 5. Essentially what they've done is they've taken this one huge ass project and have sectioned it off into 5 separate parts. For what reason, I'm not 100% sure, apart from maybe they wanted this album to be digested a little easier. One cool thing about this album is that each track actually has its own unique set of artwork. Like if you're listening to it on your iPod, each track has its own piece of artwork. Each of the 21 tracks on this album. So it's not just the album itself that's also long, it's also the tracks. The longest being 27 minutes and the shortest being about 4. So am I enjoying this 4-hour long affair? Hell yeah, I am. Not just because I am a fan of electronic music in general, or the fact that it's 4 hours in length, but for the most part, these compositions are really well executed. The average part here ranges somewhere between 48 to 50 minutes long, the longest being 53, and the shortest being about 45. In terms of the sound here, it's pretty well produced for the most part. It's mixed to where everything is given its due. Now in terms of what you're listening to, the usual suspects in terms of style are here. IDM's here, glitch is here, but there's also some drone here, some dark ambient, at least 3 different types of house music, some trance going on, bits of noise, also some industrial going on, maybe a little bit of power electronics. What's going on here is incredibly well varied. Take the opening track for example, Feed 1. I love how cavernous and kind of sinister this track is. The way the bassy atmosphere just overtakes the track overall. Like, it sounds like you're in the belly of this mechanical beast and you can do nothing but stare up as you're just floating in like digestive juices as you are just becoming this piece of nutrients for the Leviathan that have just swallowed you. The bass here is incredibly irregular. There's definitely mechanical shots of glitch going on. I do like the off-kilter synth that really hangs in the background and really just keeps things engaging from beginning to end, despite the fact that this track is 11.5 minutes long. And that's the thing with the majority of these tracks. They don't feel like that they overindulge with their song lengths, because it sounds like that these tracks are kind of in the moment in a way. While this definitely is one single project that seems reflective of a monolith machine Leviathan of some kind, there's still something really incredibly human about what it is they're doing. The amount of unpredictability within this album is actually pretty remarkable. You're not going to know what it is Autechre are going to do specifically minute after minute after minute, hell even second after second after second. Add to that, the playing here sounds kind of in the moment as well. It's not like they just formulated this idea, stretched it out to just 12 minutes and just kept it formulaic for most of the time. They are there actually fucking with the instruments that they're using. But the machinery and the instruments that they're using here, it really sounds like that they're malfunctioning and they could just do something that even they themselves can't predict at any moment, or they could just like break entirely and they have to like make up for that, which is pretty intriguing certainly. Especially the track C16 Deep Shred. It's definitely using its cavernous atmosphere incredibly well. As the beats are going on in irregularity along with the shots of glitch that goes on. I like the bouncy and crescendoing synth pattern that's on this track. It's definitely keeping me engaged. There's even like some scrubbing, I think. And there's also this moment on like the very tail end where it's gradually just stripping itself back to the point where it just becomes kind of this digital industrial sludge thing. Track 13 by 0 step, it's got this sputtering glitch thing going on. There's some bright, I assume, keyboards, maybe some hi-hat that's definitely taking on like the house elements that it's going for. There's this low-key midpoint going on, just gets itself kind of down-tempo in a way, but eventually it just builds itself back up and really closes out particularly well. The track Pendulu HV Moda, it has like these synth melodies that kind of remind me of some like Indian folk music or something of that nature. It's definitely world music-ish in a way, especially how jungly the beats and percussion that they use on this track go on with. Once again, it kind of picks up in semi-EDM fashion before the Autechre twist, as I'm going to nickname it for this review, comes in as it gets incredibly glitchy and unpredictable. I love the unrelenting bass hits that are on this track, as well as many tracks here on this album. Then we get the track Curvcaten. There's some like staticky and mechanical sparking going on. It's got a more down-tempo vibe, although it does have a pretty excellent build. I do especially love how ominous overall the track is. So this concludes Elseq 1, and now we go into Elseq 2, which starts off with the longest track on the album, about 27 minutes a total, LE6 Onset. The first half of this track has, once again, a lot of unpredictable beat patterns that really keep me engaged. There's like some weird digital backdrop that goes on, and it just gradually but surely builds, especially when it gets to the midway point where it just breaks down into this synth analog odyssey from hell. And that's the thing, despite the fact that this track is 27 minutes long, I'm not complaining about how long it is. There's actually, oddly enough, very few tracks here that I can say just go on for longer than its own good. The track Chimer 151, with these high-pitched synth patterns that it goes for, I do like the synth melody on this track as it keeps going for the brief time, or relatively brief in a way. It goes for about 5 minutes. I do dislike how repetitive the bass rhythm is, but it kind of evens out with the digital horns that pop up. Then you get the track C7B2, which is definitely one of the hardest hitting tracks on the record. The bass synth on this track is nasty. Oh god, it's just so indescribable how nasty and unrelenting this bass synth is. It's like this really cool mechanical refrain that comes up like once every few seconds or so, but it doesn't sound the exact same each time, which is definitely a plus for me. This track and a few others here certainly are surprisingly danceable in a way. Like the grooves here, you could actually turn this on to the clubs and it worked seamlessly well. And that's the thing about Elseq 2, it's only 3 tracks in length, as well as the next part, Elseq 3, which has easily the most drone-driven track on the record. eastre or eastre, or however it's pronounced. This is certainly a unrelenting drone that goes on for 22 minutes, and that's gonna be make or break for some people, and it kind of was for me at first, and to a degree it still kind of is. Just the way the drone builds sounds kind of like you're hiding from this, once again, mechanical monstrosity as it's just slowly lurking overhead, and you're just watching it from a distance, and in a way where if it just looked down, it would just find you. But I think my least favorite track here pops up on this part, which is probably why it's my least favorite part on the record. TBM2. It's probably the most standard track here. It doesn't have much of a direction other than having a mid-paced and danceable percussion groove to it. It's a bit repetitive for its own good. It's actually one of the few tracks here that can honestly say underindulges. But then you get one of the longest tracks in the album. Once again, it's a 24-minute monster mesh cinereaL, so I guess it evens out. There's an intro that kind of reminds me of Arca, how off-kilter and I guess really creepy it is at first. But then once again they get into that Autechre twist. It comes in with this really fantastic groove that I can't deny loving. There's actually a certain point where it kind of breaks in the middle, but then it just gets more off-kilter than it started with, as if that was something conceivably possible with this composition that they've already established with this track. It progresses incredibly well, though there's not really a track here that doesn't progress well. Maybe a couple, but that's really it. So ends Elseq 3. Now we go into Elseq 4 with the track ACDWN2. The groove on this track is just hard hitting as fuck as it goes on for almost 12 minutes in length. I do like the incredibly rhythmic driven synth that goes on. Certainly, the percussion on this track is, once again, particularly off-kilter and complex. It's like the whole groove just unloads on itself out of nowhere, just over and over again, all the while like little blips of variation going into it. There's some cavernous string that pops up that adds texture to this track. It's definitely a highlight for me. Then we get to the track Hold Free Casual, which is easily the most Tim Hecker Autechre have sounded in a minute. There's like some beautiful strings that pop up, and over time it just gets incredibly glitchy and just off-kilter, as if like the whole space of organic life is coming apart from the seams and is being replaced by something incredibly synthetic. This essentially fulfills your fantasy that you wanted Tim Hecker to be more glitchy and off-kilter than he already is. Then we get the track Latent Call. There's some nice jittery sampling going on that's then followed by some more unrelenting bass. I do like the groove on this track. It's pretty borderline breakbeat in a way. There's like a moment in the track where it gets subdued in the middle, but eventually once again it picks up and finishes well. The track Artov Chain. I do like the spooky wall of synth and the wobbly bass part that goes on. It's a bit brief, a bit too brief for me, but regardless, it's definitely an interesting track. It's definitely made up for with the closing track for Elseq 407 Slip. The sampling on this track is incredibly disorienting, but in a good way. Disorienting is the big word I can use for this track, especially with its time signature being used and the incorporation of turntables. It's certainly a cool closing track for Elseq 4. Then we get to the last Elseq, Elseq 5, and it's pretty much ending the project off on a more dark and ominous, but not necessarily just hard-hitting note, certainly. I think it's going to be make or break for some people, but it certainly is not that for me. We got the track freulaeux. The beat pattern here is incredibly cavernous. I do like how well Autechre have implemented a cavernous sound throughout many tracks on this album, especially given how off-kilter they've mixed this track. Though all the while these synths are juxtaposing against the darkness with this track, given how bright they are. It's a little EDM-ish in a way, but the down-tempo vibe that they have decided to go for with this track overtakes any kind of moments of EDM that may or may not pop up with this track. The track Onium has one of the darkest intros as well as one of the best builds on the album, but once again it's a lot more just off-kilter and cavernous compositions. So I guess with that in mind, it's not really a favorite of mine with the track listing, given that we've had tracks that are much more interesting but equally solid. The track Pendulu Casual has like these rolling percussion hits that are kind of jazzy in a way. It's definitely a solid dark ambient track to add to the bits of dark ambient that was already onto this album. Although I do really like the track Spaces How 5. This intro to the track is just completely gorgeous before it eventually goes into a minimal and ominous sound. What I love about this track is that over time it just has this random forte piano crescendo moment that just unloads all this random synth and strings out of nowhere, then just sinks back into darkness before once again delivering upon that again. And the closing track, spTh, something hard-hitting but also equally down-tempo in a way. I love the incredibly overbearing glitch shots that come up on this track. The percussion is maybe a bit more stripped back and a bit more skeletal given the light-ish beats going on, but it's definitely evened out by this monstrous glitch bass that this track really goes for. It just glides out particularly well and ends particularly well with its progression. I do like this track a lot, as well as how well it ends the 4 hours of music. When I first marathoned this album, I wasn't sure how I was going to process what was going on. But after I've been listening to all 4 hours of this over and over and over again, I can definitely tell that all the tracks here aren't going to do all these overly dramatic switching that within the composition. And that's probably going to turn some people off. Like, they're going to think to themselves, this is just the same idea for 10 or 20 minutes. Why would I listen to this? Rather, I think this is an exercise in how long and how just outright off-kilter and ambitious they can take these certain ideas. And that might not be for some people. Some people are probably going to be incredibly overwhelmed by this album. And if you're someone that wants to listen to this but don't want to be overwhelmed, Autechre split this into 5 parts for a reason. You can marathon it at first, but you can also easily take breaks during it. Like, if you get through with Elseq 1, you can just stop for a minute and process what it is you did, or maybe listen to Elseq 1 again before moving on to Elseq 2. And eventually, when you've given this so many listens, each track becomes easier to digest, obviously, as well as incredibly dense and intriguing to you. You can definitely start picking up all the variations within the tracks themselves. I love this album quite a bit. So far, it's set to be my favorite electronic album of the year. What the Autechre have done is that they've taken this ambitious and uncompromising IDM sound that they have perfected over the course of their career and really up the ante for a couple more hours. If you're someone that's into electronic music, then definitely give this a try. Try to take breaks and just take it easy if you feel like that this is going to be very overwhelming for you. But as for me personally, there was a potential for me to dislike this, given just the lengths of these tracks and the length of this album as a whole. But no, they've definitely put a lot of thought into most of the tracks here, and it's a damn shame that this is just a digital release, because this is definitely something I'm going to want on physical. Because what Autechre have done is once again perplexed the listener, but also have left them incredibly rewarded. This album is a plus 2.5 out of plus 3. If you're already an Autechre fan, then this is a no-brainer for you. You're probably gonna be like me and pray that this ends up on like CD or somehow miraculously vinyl at some point. But if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you like this album? Did you dislike this album? What was your reasoning for that, and what should I consider listening to and reviewing next? The CWD Music Reviews here, signing off.